I never thought that I would become the kind of person who would post about my engagement on social media without telling my parents about it, but here I am sitting in the soft light of a cozy restaurant, scrolling through my phone screen, choosing the perfect filter for a photo where my princess diamond ring shimmers under the light of evening lamps, and I don't even feel a drop of regret. It's really gorgeous. The stone captures light and refracts it with hundreds of sparkling reflections, and the smooth platinum band fits my fingers so gracefully that I can't take my eyes off it, catching myself thinking that I'm admiring not so much a symbol of impending marriage, but a confirmation that I deserve something truly beautiful. Are you sure you don't want to call your mom first? Mark's voice comes from behind me, soft, a little hesitant, but still full of hope that I will reconsider my decision. I turn to him, noticing out of the corner of my eye how the candlelight on the table is reflected in his dark eyes, and I smile faintly, feeling the warmth of his hands on my shoulders. Trust me, it won't change anything, I say, clicking the publish button and watching as the photo disappears from the screen, going into the virtual world. Mark wants to believe in the best. He is one of those people who believes that things get better over time, that people change, that you just need to give them a chance. Maybe things will be different now, he says, hugging me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. People change, Ruby. I want to believe him, but 27 years of living in the shadow of other people's successes have taught me that hope is a luxury I cannot afford. I remember every bit of disappointment that formed a huge wall between me and my parents. I remember how they left my piano concert in the 6th grade because Jessica's cheerleading competition was more important. How at my high school graduation they discussed her going to college, and at my graduation from university they spent more time. We spent more time admiring her engagement than congratulating her on my honors degree. Jessica is Jessica, I muttered, allowing myself to relax for a moment in Mark's warm embrace, but knowing deep down that there was no escaping this past. When I entered New York University for a master's degree, my mother's first reaction was not admiration, not pride, not joy for me. "Oh, that's sweet, honey, but have you heard? Jessica is expecting." Those were her first words when, full of enthusiasm and excitement, I shared the news that meant the whole world to me. It's been a few years since then, but at times like this, I can still hear her voice dismissively putting my achievements on the back burner. The phone rang. I only managed to take a deep breath before I looked at the screen and, unsurprisingly, saw the name Mom. I looked up at Mark and showed him the display with a wry smile. "That's it," I said before accepting the challenge. "Ruby Marie Thompson." Her voice was shrill, filled with such indignation that I automatically pulled the phone away from my ear. "How dare you announce your engagement on social media before telling your own mother?" I silently rolled my eyes, knowing full well that her indignation was not due to sincere resentment, but only to the fact that now she could not present herself as a caring mother who was the first to learn such important news. I had to find out about it from Aunt Carol, who saw it on Facebook. She continued, and I imagined her lips pursing into a thin line. "What kind of business is this?" I restrained the first impulse to say something that had been accumulating for years, to admit that maybe if they had ever shown real interest in my life, and not just used it as a backdrop for Jessica's success, they would have been the first to learn something important about me. But I knew that this battle was lost long before it started. "Hi Mom, I was going to call you tonight." "It doesn't matter what you were planning," she interrupted so abruptly that I almost had an emotional lash. Her voice had changed, and now it had the businesslike, almost commanding tone that I remembered from childhood. "We just have to have an engagement party at our place. We'll invite the whole family, the Petersons, the Hendersons, and the Clarks, who have just returned from Europe." I caught Mark's confused look at me, who was listening intently to every word, and saw him shake his head slightly, mouthing silently, "Are you sure?" "Actually, Mom," I began, trying to cut into her flow of words, "Mark and I were thinking of having a little celebration." "This is out of the question," a new voice suddenly rang out, low and commanding. I tensed, realizing that the call was on speakerphone. "Ruby," her father continued, in a voice that brooked no argument. We're having an engagement party, and we'll cover all the expenses. That's what real parents do. I felt my eyebrows rise at that last sentence, awakening in me the familiar feeling of irritation that I had been trying to suppress all these years. Real parents? Since when did my parents decide to act like they care about my happiness instead of just using every event as another reason to show off their status to their friends? But before I could say a word, before I could even formulate an objection, my mother had already started talking excitedly about catering, flower arrangements, and the need to hire a professional photographer because these moments need to be captured with dignity, and I realized that somehow, without even noticing it, I agreed. With all this, just because I wanted to end the conversation as soon as possible. As soon as the call ended, I took a deep breath, trying to banish the lingering feeling of anxiety that had settled somewhere in the pit of my stomach and was only getting denser by the second. I see they want to participate, Mark said softly, putting his arm around my shoulders and looking into my eyes with that expression of hope that I was already beginning to hate, because it meant that he still believed in the possibility of reconciliation, that people could change, even if all the facts said about the opposite. That's good, right? I nodded slowly, trying to look less tense than I really was. Yes, maybe you're right, I said, but even to myself, my voice sounded unconvincing. Maybe they finally see me as more than just Jessica's little sister. The first few days after the phone conversation were surprisingly calm. His father didn't interfere anymore, his mother seemed really busy organizing, and Mark, with that charming smile of his, kept saying over and over again, "I told you so," and I was already starting to think that maybe this time it would really be different. But then my phone started bursting with notifications, and the calm I'd barely begun to feel instantly disappeared. "Ruby, you need to see this," my friend Ka wrote to me, and then sent me some screenshots. I opened Facebook and immediately saw them, dozens of flower emojis, hearts and enthusiastic comments under my mother's post. As a mother, nothing brings me greater joy than the announcement that I will be hosting my youngest daughter Ruby's engagement party at our family home. Planning this special day is not just my duty as a mother, but the work of all my love. Every detail will be perfect, from the selected flowers to the gourmet catering company, because that's exactly what a devoted mother does to her child. I almost choked on my coffee when I scrolled down and saw the comments. "Diana, you are such an amazing mother. Ruby is so lucky to have you. This is what true motherly love looks like. You've always been the most devoted mother I know." And my mother, of course, responded to every comment with a fake humility that made my teeth ache. "Oh, you're too kind. I'm just doing what any good mother would do. Being a mother is my greatest blessing. Can you believe it?" I turned around, handing the phone to Mark, who was busy making breakfast. He glanced at the screen briefly, then looked back at me, clearly not understanding why it bothered me so much. "Well, at least she's excited about it," he suggested, pushing a plate of pancakes towards me, but I just shook my head, unable to hide my annoyance. "Excited by the attention, you mean?" I corrected him, putting the phone aside. "It's not about me or our engagement. All this is just so that she can demonstrate what an ideal mother she is." As if to definitively prove my point, the following comment immediately surfaced, which my mother left under her own post. "And, of course, my eldest daughter Jessica. She's such a model of what a married woman should be like. Truly the epitome of virtue and family values." I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. God forbid she writes anything about me without mentioning St. Jessica. Mark, who was reading over my shoulder, squeezed my hand, his thumb lightly stroked my skin, trying to calm me down somehow. "Hey, look on the bright side," he said, bending down to kiss my temple. "While she's busy playing Mother of the Year on Facebook, we can focus on planning our real wedding." He was right. Our wedding was scheduled in 8 months, and my mom seemed to have found a new meaning in life in organizing an engagement party that was supposed to take place in just 2 months. Perhaps this wasn't such a bad arrangement, As long as she was completely absorbed in choosing invitations and flower arrangements, I could calmly focus on what really mattered to me at our wedding, without endless advice, inappropriate comparisons with Jessica, and constant comments about how it should be done. That's right. After all, if she wants to shine in front of her friends and followers on social media, passing off my holiday as a triumph of her own maternal virtue, you're welcome. That was fine with me, as long as she didn't interfere with my real plans. Nevertheless, it was impossible to completely avoid her influence. My phone rang at least 3 times a day, notifying me of a new stage of preparation, and, as much as I hate to admit it, she really knew what she was doing. Every detail was thought out to the smallest detail: handwritten invitations with gold lettering, an individual cocktail menu carefully selected for the appetizers served, a professional photo shoot, and perfect lighting for the shots. She even found a florist who specialized in creating timeless compositions that supposedly reflected the depth of the engaged couple's feelings. I found myself wondering, despite my initial annoyance, what it would all look like. "Your mom called again," Mark informed me when I returned home one evening after a long day at work. He was standing at the kitchen counter, leisurely stirring something in the pan, and his voice was full of hidden amusement. "She wants to know if we prefer a string quartet playing classical pieces or modern arrangements." I flopped down on the couch with relief, stretching out my legs and kicking off my heels, which had turned into a torture instrument during the day. "At this point, she can make them play the opening theme from Pokémon. I don't care," I muttered, closing my eyes and enjoying the moment of relaxation. "At least I don't have to deal with all this myself." Speaking of planning, Mark's sister Emma intervened, appearing in the doorway of the living room with a laptop in her hands. She immediately went to an armchair, sprawled comfortably in it and, tapping her fingers on the keyboard, added, "I have found 3 more wedding salons that we could visit this weekend." Emma was a real salvation for me in the process of preparing for the wedding. Unlike my mother, who cared primarily about the external impression, she really wanted to help us create a holiday that would be important to us, and not just look spectacular in photos. She organized countless corporate events and charity balls. She had amazing taste, and she wasn't afraid to be honest when something looked terrible on me. While Mom was busy with the engagement, Emma and I focused on the wedding, choosing the venue, discussing the menu, trying on dresses, and although I had never imagined myself as a bride who was captivated by the process of preparation, I found myself enjoying it for the first time in a long time. Everything was moving forward, and it was especially pleasant that Mark's parents, Tom and Linda, were incredibly tactful and supported us without interfering in the process. Every Sunday they came to dinner with us, discussed possible catering options, offered to help with the organization, but they never pressed or insisted on their opinion. They brought food so that we could focus on discussing the details, and it was refreshing to feel supported without drama, without hidden pricks, without having to meet someone's expectations. But what surprised me the most was that my relationship with my parents suddenly began to improve. Every Saturday I went to dinner with them, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mark, and for the first time in my life they seemed really interested in me. "How is the new project progressing at work?" "What is it?" my father asked one day, and the most amazing thing was that he was really waiting for my answer, and not just using the question as an excuse to turn the conversation to Jessica. "Tell us more about how you and Mark met," Mom said, and there was no usual hint of condescension in her voice, just genuine interest. "It was weird. Nice, but weird." It was as if I found myself in a parallel universe where I was not just Jessica's younger sister, not a backdrop for other people's achievements, but a full-fledged personality worthy of attention. The days flew by, and before I realized that time was flying so fast, the engagement was only 2 weeks away. I was sitting at my desk in the office, looking through the quarterly reports, when the phone suddenly rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. "Ruby, you need to come home right now," she said, and her voice was strained, the way it only was when something really serious was going on. "What happened?" I asked, automatically tensing up. It's urgent, she replied shortly, not bothering to give any explanation, and hung up the phone. I spent the rest of the day distracted by what could be so urgent about an engagement party that had already been practically planned down to the last detail. When the clock struck 5, I grabbed my things and headed for my parents' house. As soon as I walked through the front door, I was immediately overcome by a strange feeling of anxiety, that subtle but tangible electric charge in the air that warned me that something was definitely wrong. Children's laughter echoed through the house, clear, iridescent, but at the same time unnaturally loud, as if someone was trying to drown out the tense silence enveloping everything around them. I immediately recognized the voices. My nephew Tyler and my niece Emma, aged 6 and 3, were screaming and running in circles around the coffee table, their small feet beating a fast rhythm on the parquet. But despite their sincere amusement, there was something wrong, some contrivance, as if adults tacitly allowed children create this chaos to avoid having to talk. When I entered the living room, my premonition only intensified. My sister, my perfect, flawless Jessica, was sitting on the couch, and unlike the kids, she was clearly not having fun. I slowed my pace abruptly, examining her as my brain tried to process the strangeness of what was happening. Jessica lived 3 states away, appeared only on major family holidays, and the last time she arrived unannounced. Well, this has never happened at all. And now she was sitting on the couch between our parents, her eyes red and swollen, and when I got closer, I noticed that her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her expensive mascara was running, leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. Her mother hugged her shoulders, gently stroking her back, and her father, sitting on the other side, stared intently at the floor, as if it hid the answers to all the questions of the universe. An unpleasant knot tightened in my chest, and I instinctively held my breath and slowly lowered my purse onto the nearest chair. "What's going on?" I asked, looking from one face to the other, trying to figure out what misfortune had just befallen our family. There was a pause in the room, long and heavy, until Jessica let out a short, convulsive sigh, like a strangled sob. "Is everything okay?" I asked more gently, but Jessica just squeezed her eyes shut as if in pain and shook her head. "She left him," Mom said softly, continuing to stroke her back, and my heart skipped a beat for a moment. Jessica sobbed louder, her shoulders shook, and then I finally understood the meaning of my mother's words. "Wait," I drawled slowly, not believing what I was hearing. "You mean Jessica and Tom are getting divorced?" The silence was so deep that even the children, who continued to run around the room, suddenly seemed far away, as if the noise was coming from another world. I sat up with difficulty, feeling the ground slip slightly from under my feet. "Jessica and Tom are getting divorced." The same Jessica who posted weekly Instagram posts about her perfect marriage, decorated with retouched photos of her and Tom standing with their arms around each other, against the backdrop of another luxury resort or expensive restaurant. The very couple that my mother never missed an opportunity to set an example for me, calling them an example of a strong and harmonious union. 7 years of marriage, flaunted, elevated to the absolute, suddenly fell apart like a house of cards. But what happened? I asked cautiously, still not fully believing in the reality of what was happening. "I thought you two were doing great." As soon as I said those words, Jessica's head snapped up, and anger flashed in her reddened eyes. "It's none of your business, Ruby." She snapped, and there was something like rage in her voice, but not so much at me as at the situation itself. "God, you're always poking your nose where it shouldn't be." I raised my hands in a conciliatory gesture, not intending to argue, but before I could say anything, she lowered her head, and all her anger instantly deflated, like a punctured balloon. "He cheated on me," she whispered, sighing violently and wiping her eyes with a crumpled napkin. "I found the messages, the photos. I couldn't take it anymore, so I packed up the kids and left." Mom sobbed noisily, hugging Jessica tighter to herself, and her father, without saying a word, continued to study the carpet intently, as if hoping to find in it the answer to all the family tragedies. I sat there trying to make sense of it all, replaying in my head the last months, the last conversations, the last admiring speeches from my mother about Jessica and Tom being role models in married life. Last month, she announced this at a party at her cousin Sarah's, citing them as an example to all young couples, assuring them that this is what an ideal marriage should look like. "I'm so sorry, Jess," I finally said, and surprisingly, I really meant those words. No matter how annoyed I was with her before, no matter how infuriated I was that she was always the perfect daughter for her parents, and I remained in the shadows, at that moment in front of me was not the perfect Jessica, but a woman whose whole world had just collapsed. I was about to text Mark that our dinner plans would have to be postponed when Mom suddenly cleared her throat. "There's something else," she said, and I was instantly alerted by the tone in her voice that she used when she was about to tell me something I wouldn't like at all. I looked at her, and she looked away, as if she was preparing for the storm to follow. "Your father and I have been talking," she continued, squeezing Jessica's shoulder and considering the circumstances. "We think it would be best to cancel the engagement party." I blinked. "What?" "Your sister is going through a hard time," she explained, as if I needed to explain the obvious. "It's just inappropriate to have a celebration at a time like this." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Mom," I began, but she had already looked away, pretending that this conversation was not up for discussion. The room began to spin slightly, and I forced myself to concentrate so as not to say something I would regret later. "You can't be serious," I finally said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Everyone's already invited," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady despite the rising tide of anger. "Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike are flying from California, the Hendersons are coming from Florida, Grandma Helen has already booked a hotel room." I tried to appeal to common sense, to facts that couldn't just disappear, even if my mother suddenly decided that this party had no right to exist anymore. But before I could finish my thought, Jessica jumped up from the couch so abruptly that Mom almost lost her balance in surprise. Her eyes, reddened from crying, sparkled with anger, and mascara was smeared across her cheeks in black streaks, giving her the appearance of a wounded animal cornered. "God, you're so selfish, Ruby!" she screamed, and her voice, filled with despair and anger, made the children in the corner quiet down and stop playing. I could see Tyler and Emma watching us warily, their small faces reflecting a childish misunderstanding of the situation, but even they felt that something heavy and viscous was hanging in the air, threatening to burst with a loud pop. "My whole life is falling apart," she continued, pointing her finger at me, as if blaming me for all her misfortunes. "Do you have any idea what it's like to find out that your husband sleeps with other women? How does it feel to explain to the kids why Daddy won't be coming home anymore? And all you can think about is your stupid engagement party." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, responding to Jessica's anger with my own outburst of rage. "Jess, I'm really sorry about what happened to Tom. It's really a pity. But my engagement has nothing to do with your divorce. These are completely different events that have nothing to do with each other." But, apparently, my words only made her angrier. "I'm your sister." Her voice rose an octave higher. "You have to support me. You should have suggested canceling the engagement yourself as soon as you found out about my situation. But no. You're too selfish to even think about my feelings." I looked at my parents, hoping to see at least a shadow of common sense, at least a drop of understanding in their faces, but my mother had already straightened her back, putting on that expression that I called principled, a face that meant that her decision was final and not subject to discussion. "Mom, Dad, please, this is crazy," I tried again. "You can't just cancel because Jessica is upset." But Mom just pursed her lips and shook her head before saying with frightening calmness, "Actually, I can. And I've already done it." I froze. "What?" "I called the catering organizer this morning to cancel the order. The decorations were also canceled." And I've already started calling the guests to tell them that the engagement is off because of an important family matter. There was a ringing silence in the room. Somewhere in the corner, Tyler and Emma were talking in whispers, but their voices seemed to come from far away, through the buzzing in my ears. "You did, what?" I asked, and my voice was shaking, but not from shock, but from rage, from not understanding how you could do this behind my back without even talking to me. "Don't you dare raise your voice at your mother," my father suddenly thundered, finding his voice for the first time that evening. "After all we've done for you." I laughed, but it sounded more like a strangled, sobbing exhalation. "After all you've done for me?" I looked at him incredulously, shaking my head. "You mean how you've made me feel like I'm second only to Jessica all my life? How did you turn every success of mine into a minor event because Jessica always had something more important? And now you're literally canceling my engagement because it's hard for her?" My gaze darted to my sister, who, despite her tears and disheveled appearance, looked at me as if I were the most insensitive creature in the world. "How dare you, Jessica?" I shouted, feeling tears of anger burn my eyes. "I knew you were jealous of me, but this is a new fall." She opened her eyes wide, as if I had just hit her, but I didn't care anymore. I grabbed my purse, feeling my whole body shaking with rage. "You set me up," I continued, not caring that my speech was breaking into a scream. "This whole thing, this stupid party, this sudden involvement in my life, it was just another way to prove that Jessica would always come first." I paused, took a deep breath, realizing that nothing would change, that I could scream, cry, beat against the wall, but my words would not reach their hearts. "Well, congratulations," I took a step back, feeling my legs give way from emotion. "The message has been received." Loud and clear. I turned around and headed for the exit, ignoring their calls. The road home was blurred, I could hardly see where I was going, everything in front of my eyes merged into one spot, the streets, the lights, cars, but inside me a fire was raging, burning so brightly that it seemed capable of burning a hole in my chest. When I finally got to my apartment, Mark was already waiting for me, his face full of worry, and there was tension in his eyes. "Ruby, what happened?" "What is it?" he asked, coming up to me and cupping my face in his hands. "You weren't answering your phone." I collapsed on the couch, feeling the trembling in my hands still wouldn't go away, and told him everything. Before we could even begin to process what had happened, my phone came alive again, bursting with messages and calls. One by one, endless alerts poured onto the screen, and I knew that these were our caring relatives who had heard about an important family matter and were now rushing to express their admiration for my mother's sacrifice or condemn my insensitivity. I looked at the phone, at its bright, flickering screen, then slowly shifted my gaze to Mark, who, without saying a word, was already handing me a glass of water, knowing that at this moment I just needed to breathe more than anything in the world. "Ruby, honey, are you all right? We found out about the breakup last week, so I'm sorry if you need to talk to someone." I was sitting dazedly staring at my phone screen when the next message made everything fall into place. "Your mother didn't tell us about the cancellation of the engagement." I know it must be hard watching Jessica go through a divorce and at the same time planning her own wedding. Perhaps it's best to take a break. I reread these words over and over again, feeling anger boil up inside me, until finally I realized the full scale of what was happening. Mom didn't just cancel my engagement, she twisted the story so that now it seemed to everyone that I had decided to cancel the holiday because of my own relationship problems, as if I needed support, and she, undoubtedly, as a caring mother, just made the right decision for my own good. Not only did she cover for herself and Jessica, but she also made me the villain in this story. I was still staring at the phone in a daze, trying to figure out how sophisticated she'd pulled it off, when Mark gently took it from my hands, put it on the coffee table, and said softly, "Hey, do you remember what we originally wanted to do before your mom stole everything?" I blinked, looking at him, still feeling a burning sense of injustice growing in my chest. A little intimate celebration with people who really care about us, he continued, wrapping his warm hands around my arms. There was so much love and confidence in his eyes that the tension inside me slowly but surely began to ease. Mark grabbed his phone and, flipping through his contacts, was already dialing a number. And I just have a sister who, in fact, is a professional event organizer. I heard the beep, then Emma answered the phone, and before Mark could say anything, her voice sounded over the speaker. "We have a situation," he began quickly. "Listen, can you help us organize a party at the restaurant for the original engagement date?" There was a moment's pause on the other end of the line, and then Emma's agitated voice rang out. "Are you kidding? I wanted to save this party from Mommy Dearest from day one. Give me an hour, I'll call someone." I closed my eyes, feeling relieved for the first time in this whole nightmare. For the first time since I left my parents' house, I felt free. While Emma was working her organizational miracles, I opened my laptop and began to draft a post on social media. "Dear friends and family, I want to clarify some misunderstandings. Mark and I are still very engaged and happy together. Our engagement will take place on the originally scheduled date, but we decided to move it to a restaurant for a more intimate setting. The meeting is open to anyone who has already planned a trip. We will be glad to share this day with you. Please let me know if you can attend the revised celebration. Love, Ruby." I clicked the post button and watched with bated breath as the comments started coming in one after another. Some wrote that they would definitely come, but others had already managed to cancel tickets or reschedule plans, believing my mother's version of family circumstances. I grabbed a notebook and started counting the confirmed guests, making notes. My family had shrunk significantly. Apparently, my mother's calculated move had taken its toll, but Mark's family was going to come in full force. His parents, Emma, aunts, uncles, cousins, 30 people. I called Emma back. "Hi, we need a place for 30 people." "Already there," she replied, and I heard her typing frantically on the keyboard. "I have 3 restaurants on hold. What do you think about the Italian restaurant where Mark took you on your first date?" I pressed my palm to my lips, feeling tears come to my eyes, but this time not from resentment, but from something warm, pure, real. This evening was supposed to be ours. And now he's going to be like that. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, buttoning my blouse and idly scrolling through the list of upcoming appointments in my head, my phone suddenly rang, startling me. I glanced at the screen and immediately froze. Tom. My sister's husband. Or rather, the ex-husband now. We always got along well. We could text about children or family meetings, exchange news, and despite my long-standing resentment that Tom was just another trophy in Jessica's collection of achievements, I never considered him a bad person. However, since Jessica announced her divorce, we hadn't spoken once, and now his call seemed strange to me, almost wrong. I pressed the answer button, not knowing what to expect. "Ruby, this is Tom." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept well or had been thinking too much before this call. "I've heard about your engagement. I wanted to congratulate you and Mark. I know I won't be able to attend the celebration at the restaurant, but I wanted to wish you all the best in advance." His words took me by surprise. I expected anything, tension, awkwardness, maybe even a hidden rebuke, but instead he just called to congratulate me. But before I could stop myself, before my mind gave the signal to shut up, my tongue had already given out what had been tearing inside me all these days. "How could you do that, Tom? How could you cheat on my sister?" There was a dull silence on the other end of the line, the kind that presses on the ears and turns seconds into hours. Then Tom made a strange sound, something between a bitter laugh and a soft sob. "What she told you?" His voice was low, tired, too calm to be indifferent. "Ruby, I've never cheated on your sister. Not once. I didn't have time to say anything. I just squeezed the phone harder in my palm, and he was already continuing, in a voice full of bitterness, but devoid of surprise. Jessica had affairs on the side. Several novels. The world swam around me. I have proof. Messages. Receipts from hotels. Everything. I couldn't breathe. Her last boyfriend even sent me photos of them together, thinking that I already know about their relationship. The room spun, my hands trembled so much that I could barely hold the phone, and somewhere in the back of my mind a wild, panic thought flashed: I'm going crazy. I swallowed hard, feeling my heart racing. Would you tell me everything, if I recorded this conversation? Actually, I'd rather you did. His voice sounded hollow, almost empty. I'm tired of being the bad guy in her story. I quickly turned on the recorder. For the next hour, Tom told me the whole story, every dirty detail, every lie, every manipulation of Jessica, her endless string of infidelities, gaslighting, attempts to make him look like a tyrant and an abuser so that no one doubts who is the hero and who is the villain in this fairy tale. He mentioned dates, names, meeting places, hotel rooms, named people who knew and were silent because they were afraid of her anger, named friends who saw but did not say anything because it was none of their business. I listened, feeling the ground crumble under my feet. The days flew by filled with endless thoughts, and before I could realize that time was flying so fast, the evening of our engagement arrived. The restaurant looked great, lit by soft lights, filled with the aromas of freshly prepared dishes and the light hum of lively voices. Emma surpassed herself by decorating the hall with elegant but restrained details, creating an atmosphere of comfort, warmth, and a real celebration. 30 of the closest people, real friends and family members, filled a separate dining room with laughter, smiles, and genuine joy. For a moment, it seemed to me that everything was perfect, that I had really put the pain, disappointment, and resentment behind me, that now I was finally where I wanted to be, with those who really cared about me. But then my Aunt Carol suddenly pulled me aside while serving snacks. Her hand gently squeezed my elbow, and there was uncertainty in her eyes. "Ruby, dear, I need to tell you something," she began, toying with the glass of wine in her hands, and I felt everything tighten inside, as if my body knew in advance what was coming. "Your mom called me yesterday." My breathing was labored. She was. Aunt Carol stammered, searching for words. "She wasn't herself. She said terrible things about you. She called you an egotist, a terrible daughter, and a sister for agreeing to this party." Something heavy and icy slid into my stomach, squeezing from the inside. But before I could respond, other relatives began to gather around us. "She called me, too," Uncle Mike shook his head. "She said that I shouldn't come because it would hurt Jessica's feelings." "And me," Cousin Rachel added, pursing her lips. "She called everyone, Ruby. She said that we shouldn't support your selfish behavior because Jessica is suffering from divorce and her husband's infidelity. She said that throwing this party is like turning a knife in Jessica's back," someone else added quietly. I looked at the faces around me, at their doubts, their embarrassment, their hidden resentment, and suddenly everything fell into place. Mom didn't just want to cancel my engagement. She wanted to ruin my day. I exhaled slowly, barely holding back the anger that was bursting out. The lie lasted long enough. "Everyone, could you get my attention for a moment?" My voice, calm but firm, cut through the hum of conversation in the restaurant, and gradually all eyes turned to me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was clutching my phone tightly in my hands, and although I wanted to just let go of the situation, just enjoy this evening, I knew that the truth had to come out now. "You all need to hear something," I added, activating the recording playback, and at the same moment Tom's voice echoed through the private dining room, filling the space with a clear, even tone. He talked about Jessica's novels, the evidence he had gathered, how she had turned everything around to make him look like a villain, and how long he had been silent while she was doing it. He explained how she manipulated everyone, including their own children, to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage and the image of an unhappy but devoted wife. For the next 15 minutes, the silence in the hall was so thick that you could hear a pin drop. Aunt Carol froze with a glass of wine that had not reached her mouth. Uncle Mike's fork fell from his hand onto his plate with a light clatter. Cousin Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, and her eyes widened in shock. But most of all, I wanted to see their reaction. I turned to my parents, who were sitting motionless, their faces pale, but not from surprise, but rather from the realization that now everyone knows what they were hiding. They knew, I said, breaking the long silence. They knew everything. The eyes of the relatives darted to my parents, and I continued without looking away. They knew the truth about Jessica, but they were still willing to ruin my engagement to protect her lies. They didn't choose me again, as they have done all my life. The pause that arose was deafening, filled with shock and overestimation by many of those present of the whole picture that they had drawn in their heads while listening to my mother. Aunt Carol came up to me first and hugged me tightly. The others followed her. They apologized, said they didn't know they were in this manipulative game, and that if they had known the truth, they would never have sided with my mother. Even those who initially supported her were now shaking their heads in disbelief and embarrassment. And then Mark stood up, raised his glass, and announced loudly, "Let's let this go and focus on what's really important today. We are here to celebrate our engagement and our future together." These words relieved the tension that filled the air, and the party continued, warmer and more sincere than before. The truth came out, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by my extended family. The next morning, when the sun was just beginning to light up the streets outside, my phone rang. 7 a.m. I looked at the screen and felt a tired irritation rising inside me. "Mom." I was hardly surprised. "How dare you?" Her voice rang shrilly through the speaker, anger raging in it, but not sadness, not regret, but pure rage. "How dare you humiliate your sister like that? How dare you bring our family's dirty laundry out in public?" I took a deep breath, not letting her draw me into the usual blame game. "I didn't dare do anything, Mom," I replied, surprisingly calmly. "I just revealed the truth that you were trying to hide." An outburst of hysteria followed. Mom screamed, accused me of betrayal, called me an ungrateful, disgusting daughter, said that I had destroyed our family, but there was no shadow of regret in her voice for her actions. There was no attempt to realize her mistakes, only rage that she had failed to maintain control. Finally, unable to find any more weapons, she hung up, calling me all the horrible names she could think of. After a couple of minutes, the phone vibrated again, but this time with messages. From Jessica. One thing after another. "You're a traitor. You ruined my life. You've always been jealous of me. You and Tom set up everything to destroy me." With each new message, I became more and more aware that my sister was unable to admit her guilt. I didn't answer any of them. I just blocked her number. Then my mom's number. Then the father's number. I felt no pain, no regret. Only liberation. Later that morning, Mark found me reading our wedding notebook. I was going through the guest list, making notes, already knowing which names to cross out, and for the first time in a long time I felt relieved. "Are you okay?" "What is it?" he asked, sitting down next to me and lightly touching my arm. I looked up, thought for a moment, checking myself, and suddenly realized that yes, actually, yes. I smiled at him and closed my notebook. I just made some changes to our guest list. It's smaller now, but better. Looking back, I didn't regret revealing the truth. I didn't regret cutting ties with my parents and Jessica. Sometimes the family you were born into is not the family you deserve. But that's okay. Because Mark, Emma, his parents, and all those who were with him that night showed me what true family love looks like. In 6 months, I will officially become a part of their family. and I couldn't be happier.